Too loud. Hi everyone, nice to see you all. I'll give a brief introduction of myself and the talk today, and then we'll start with some Q&As with our guests here today. But for those who don't know, my name is Sakina White. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Liverpool, based in the History Department. I just want to thank you all, obviously, for coming for the launch of this amazing book and Q&A session today, where we'll be talking to the illustrators and adapters of this fantastic graphic novel adaptation of C.L.R. James's Toussaint Louverture, the story of the only successful slave revolt in history. So for those who aren't aware, the text has been adapted. The graphic novel is based on the play by C.L.R. James, who's a Trinidadian historian, journalist and activist, and who's the author of several works, but probably the most famous of his is The Black Jacobins, a history of the Haitian Revolution. And the play upon which the graphic novel we'll be looking at today opened in London in 1936, with Paul Robeson in the title role. For the first time, black actors appeared on the British stage in a work by a black playwright. The script had been lost for almost 70 years when a draft copy was discovered among C.L.R. James's archive in 2005, I think it was. Now, this extraordinary drama has been reimagined by artist Nic and Sakina Karimjee, partners in life, art, politics, and more recently, parenthood. So Sakina, as I'm sure she'll tell us more a bit about today, has a background in theatre, working behind the scenes in sets and costume design, production, and as a draft person, planning scenery builds and stage plans, alongside being a keen political activist, involved in campaigns like the Anti-Nazi League, as well as being a secretary for Birmingham Stop the War Coalition in 2001. Nic Watts is an illustrator and has illustrated for educational books, children's books, comics, and websites. And like Sakina, he too became involved in political activism for a very young age, being taken to demos, political meetings, and picket lines by his family. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of that in our Q&A. But before we do, I was wondering if you'd be able to, for those who haven't read the graphic novel yet or aren't familiar with the play, be able to give an overview of the graphic novel and its key stories and themes.
Cool, thank you, Jess. So, thank you for coming, everybody. So the play follows the development of the Haitian Revolution, and it follows the journey of Toussaint Louverture, its most prominent leader, I suppose its most famous leader. And it follows the development of how it went from an uprising of the enslaved to become a full-blown revolution. And what are we showing now? Okay. Cool. All right. Okay. So in this scene here, we have this scene here begins just before the uprising of the enslaved, as a French officer is sent from the revolutionary government of France, and he meets a planter of the Colonial Assembly, Willet, and in this scene we see the power struggles that are going on in Haiti at the time, in San Domingo, as it was known.
In the wake of the French Revolution, so the revolution, we're 2 years into the Revolution of France, and that's created all sorts of kind of debates and upheavals and discussions in Haiti, and different people are kind of vying for power and control and demanding more rights or resisting those rights, or sort of. So we start in that.
Yeah, we start at that moment where there are so many different interest groups, I guess, amongst the whites and also the mulattoes, who we call now free people of colour or mixed race. And then we move to Bois-Cayenne, is that right? Which is a mass voodoo ceremony and political meeting that took place on the same night in the graphic novel as the meeting between the whites. And this meeting actually happened, and it was like the inception of the revolution. Took part in the middle of an amazing tempest, and yeah, that was the start of the revolution in Haiti.
Yeah, and then so through the book, really, we sort of follow the key moments of the next 12 years of the revolution. And we see, you know, kind of, it particularly follows, I suppose, sort of the black leadership, the revolutionary leadership, and the sort of debates and discussions and key moments that go on there. And then also kind of key colonial white characters, from sort of politicians to military generals to the slave-owning planters, and so on as well. And as Nick said, it sort of shows how the revolt, it starts off as a revolt and sort of increasingly becomes radicalised. The demands are increased as the confidence grows, really, and also the slave owners and the plantation owners refuse to make any concessions. So whereas they start off trying to win concessions and reforms, they end up becoming increasingly revolutionary because they won't give anything. So they're like, well, we have to win our complete freedom because we can't negotiate, you know. And in that process, you see this kind of transformation of people who lose their fear. And so, you know, before the revolution, it was San Domingo. You know, we call it Haiti today since the revolution, and it was a French colony, and it was the richest and most productive colony in the whole world, and it had the most exploited and sort of abused, enslaved people. So you've got this kind of extremes of life going on there, really, which you see in those first two scenes that Nick was showing. You know, you have this, it's a great juxtaposition of these two moments on the same evening, really. And so over those 12 years, they managed to successfully rise up and not only overthrow their colonial planters, but also the most powerful empires of Spain, Britain and France. Spain and Britain both tried to take advantage of the kind of upheaval of the revolution and try and take control of this really profitable colony. They were like, oh, lots of, you know, they both invaded and tried to take advantage of that. And then so they had to defeat those invading armies as well as their own initial colonialists. And by the end of it, they'd abolished slavery, and for a time at the height of the French Revolution, they'd actually pressured France into abolish slavery in all of their colonies, and they established the first independent black republic outside of Africa. I'll just show an image from the end of the play, where we see them tearing up the San Domingo flag and creating the Haiti flag as we know today.
They ripped out the white bit.
Yeah, the end bit is kind of my favourite part of the graphic novel because it gets more and more powerful and more vivid, I guess, in the emotions. But like you said, you deal with such a wide variety of histories, kind of political complexity. There is a lot going on. What were the main challenges of adapting the novel, and how did you prepare for that? So, as Jess at the beginning, the book is an adaptation of the play. And preparation-wise, a lot of that, I guess, was getting to know the script really well, breaking it down, and because we were working together, a lot of discussing what does it mean, what's it about, and what do we want to communicate from it, because obviously there's different ways you can, you know, interpret and present things. We also did quite a lot of research, you know, around the topics and themes of it, but also visual research, you know, for the illustrations. Nick particularly did a lot of the research, you know, reading books around sort of the Haitian Revolution, slavery, colonialism, the French Revolution, you know, all the kind of themes. At the point I had, as Jess was saying, I also work in theatre, so I had a full-time job at the time, so, you know, we relied on Nick to do a lot of the reading. I didn't have time to, but it also was really helpful because a lot of what I ended up doing was kind of being like the fresh eyes of what someone who doesn't know every detail of this, and would, you know, if you didn't already know loads of the background, would you understand what we were doing? So hopefully in some ways that helped us, you know, be able to kind of view it from the outside of what we were communicating.
Yeah, and I think the main challenge was to tell the story like clearly, consistently and concisely, and also trying to keep it obviously beautiful and dramatic. And you know, I suppose the danger for me was over researching things and finding out lots of different anecdotes about the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution has so many amazing things happen during it, like some of them awful and some of them incredibly inspirational. But I think I kind of got lost in, and the whole thing got quite muddied. And this is quite early on, and obviously Sakina, working in theatre production, made me read Stanislavski. What's his name?
Yeah, Stanislavski, who was a Russian theatre director from the 20s and 30s, and he writes a lot about how when you're putting on a theatre production, everything has to like serve this one through line of this like coherent narrative. So if whoever's acting different parts and things, it's not about grabbing the attention for yourself or whatever. It's all about serving this coherent narrative.
Yeah,
and we talked a lot about how if you know, like Nick wanting to add in this detail or this visual thing or this anecdote or whatever, it all had to be about serving one kind of goal of telling the story and not adding in too much other stuff that it ended up confusing people.
But
you know.
at the same time, like, you know, I was reading through the play, working out which page, you know, spreads, and then working out individual frames and what was said there, and where there was no text at all, no speaking at all. And some images and some scenes came to me immediately and were like, just, there you go, it was amazing. But then other scenes were an absolute nightmare. Like one scene, third scene, I think that we talk about later, ended up being redrafted 8 times. And obviously redrafting something 8 times when you're drawing it is quite a big deal. And yeah, it was, you know, that scene there's a particularly high amount of like politics going on and different characters with different agendas, with different political kind of like, well, they got different political through lines, and there was also humour involved, which kind of like made it quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean that you managed to make it comprehensible is like a demonstration of how you can tell there's been a lot of energy and attention been put into making it accessible for a readership that is not just academics, for example.
That was really important to us.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, we weren't just speaking to academics, but we were speaking to anyone who wants to learn about it.
Absolutely. So could you tell us then a bit more about why and how you got involved in the project and how you first got interested in doing it?
Okay, so you know, I've been illustrating for I don't know, 25 years, quite a long time. As Jess said, doing lots of different types of illustrations. But you know, I'd always wanted to do, I'd started off doing comic books years ago, doing little small press comics and stuff like that, and I'd moved away from creative stuff for a long time. But I was still illustrating, but it was still kind of creative. I was doing stuff for local authorities and stuff like that. But I always wanted to do a full-length graphic novel. And like, I think there can't be as many events in world history, well, I kind of feel like there's definitely not, which have like such a great amount of magnitude and had such ramifications historically as the Haitian Revolution, and yet are so underrepresented in popular culture. You know, where's the massive movie about the Haitian Revolution or the TV series? You know, there are some prose books, and obviously there are quite a lot of academic books. But if you compare the amount of academic books to the amount of academic books about Napoleon as one person, it's dwarfed.
If you compare Toussaint and Napoleon,
Yeah, I think there's
arguably they should have a similar historical kind
weight,
of weight. Yet it's
we're very interested to see if
incomparable.
the upcoming film about Napoleon mentions the Haitian Revolution, because really it should, but we'll find out. Like personally, I first encountered the Haitian Revolution as a teenager. As Jess said, my dad's very political, both my parents were very political, very active in left-wing politics. And we used to drive around the country and he'd play me political tapes. And there's one by Paul Foote, who was a journalist and activist about the Haitian Revolution. And it's the most wonderful talk about the Haitian Revolution and about, like, you know, he always brings in like poetry and stuff. There's amazing Wordsworth poem, I think, is it Wordsworth? Okay, the guy who did the Daffodils, about Toussaint. he finishes off with. And it's just such a great, but it always just like inspired me so much, and I was always like, why am I the only person who's heard of the Haitian Revolution? Well, obviously I wasn't, but anyway. And then later in 2001 I read the Black Jacobins for the first time. I found it quite complex. And then in 2012 I had the idea of creating a graphic novel.
Again then.
Yeah, I had an idea of creating a graphic novel of the Black Jacobins, which Sakina turned and said, how do we do that?
Yeah, so yeah, it was Nick's very much Nick's idea originally, and I mean, as Jess said, I've been politically active really since my teens, and have always worked in theatre, and for years I wanted to try and kind of combine those different parts of myself to be doing sort of political art, and for a long time I saw that, you know, imagine that would be in theatre, and it's never really happened. And so Nick and I have, you know, we've been a couple for a long time, and we've always kind of collaborated, but sort of on each other's work. And this is the first time we've really formally done a, you know, big project together. And it's been, you know, for me like a great opportunity really to feel like I'm sort of combining those different parts of myself of doing, you know, something artistic and creative, but also of, you know, trying to make, you know, a political statement really through what we're doing. Yeah, and just to explain, which I guess makes sense as we keep talking, in terms of the sort of roles we took. So Nick's the illustrator of the project, he drew the pictures, but we worked very closely on how we adapted it and what we drew, and, you know, from the kind of big questions of what we're communicating down to little details of, you know, that tree shouldn't be there, or, you know what I mean, whatever, you know, and I did all the sort of the layouts and things in the end, the digital ones and stuff. So that's the kind of, you know, work division.
So can I ask if then was the script in the play? For those ones, is it verbatim from the play itself?
Yeah.
So leading on from that, because you spoke a bit about the lack of public awareness about the Haitian Revolution, how much did you know about the Haitian Revolution before you read the play, and also what surprised you about what you had read?
Okay, so I read Black Jacobins, so I read, which was written a few years later, so I'm guessing James knew more about the Haitian Revolution when he wrote that than he did in 1934. But, you know, I suppose what surprised me was just how clear the play was, because the Black Jacobins is a wonderful book, but it's quite complicated. There's a lot of different parties involved, and also what James is able to do with writing a play was able to like bring in like the characters' emotional lives and their emotional journeys, especially Toussaint.
It's a drama, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
it's not, you know, the Black Jacobins itself is not a dry history book. You know, it's full of like emotion and drama and anger. But a story
and a history and a play is slightly different.
As definitely not an academic, it's a bit overwhelming with the amount of information. You can end up thinking like, well, I understood most of that, but what he manages to do is he enables it to be really, he distills that story down into the fundamental elements, and then that allows him to like tell this story really clearly, but he's not simplifying it. It's not simple. But also, I think
it's sort of more accessible.
It's more accessible.
And you know, there is detail in the Black Jacobins. It's not me. It's about the lack of, you know, the volume of detail, I guess. Isn't it?
But also, I guess what kept coming back to us again and again, like you're doing this work, it's going on for 10 years, and you're drawing pictures, and you're rereading it, and you can become a bit like, oh, and then you reread a bit, and you're like, oh my God, he's such a great playwright. And for a man,
not known as a playwright.
For a man that's not known as a playwright, and then suddenly you're reading this play, and you're like, this is brilliant. You know, can I do it justice?
So when we started, I knew a lot less than Nick. You know, I knew a little bit about the revolution. I'd kind of heard, you know, from when I was younger, friends who'd read the book who talked to me about certain things, but I hadn't, you know, so much read it, but one of the things that really surprised me as we started, reading this and doing the research is how intertwined it was with the French Revolution. I just hadn't really picked up on or appreciated that at all before, and how they sort of both influenced each other. And I knew that France had abolished slavery for a while during the revolution, but I hadn't realised that that was under pressure from a revolution in their own colonies, and how that interplay was going on. And also how, you've got this kind of crazy situation where the revolutionaries in Haiti had to almost keep swapping sides because of things that were changing in France. So, they start off and they're fighting against the French colonialists, governments and their own plantation owners. And for a stage they align themselves with the Spanish, who offer them like arms and supplies and things, because the Spanish, who own the other half of the islands, that's now the Dominican Republic, they were trying to get control of the Haiti side.
All that lovely profit.
Yeah. And so they aligned themselves with the Spanish for a while against the French, but then the French abolished slavery and they joined with the French. So they're then fighting alongside the French against the Spanish and the British. And then Napoleon comes to power in France, and the revolution in France is really going backwards.
Degeneration.
From its kind of high point of radicalism. And they end up having to then, Napoleon reinvades, and they end up fighting against the French again. So all these things that are happening on the other side of the world, that they've got, are completely influencing what's happening to them. And often that news was slow to travel as well, so there's like a lag and things. But all of that I was really, I hadn't appreciated at all before that interaction.
Yeah, just to add, basically the two revolutions, the one in France and the one in Haiti, were out of zinc. So the most radical points of the French Revolution were actually when the Haitian Revolution wasn't quite so radical, and then the Haitian Revolution became more radical, and then there was the degeneration of the revolution in France that led to Napoleon. And so there was a sort of out of zincness of the radicalism, and if radicalism had been in zinc, history would be different.
And it isn't just the angle you thought about it, but normally the French Revolution is this historical thread, and seen as like the epicenter of modern history. Modern history is seen as beginning in 1789, but what you're offering, or what C.L.R. James is offering, is a history, or is a world history that starts with, that centres the Haitian Revolution as one of those kind of important turning points. And I think also what you're saying about C.L.R. James, it's as much about him as it is about Toussaint Louverture, which I really enjoy. It's kind of like twofold. So thinking more about like the content of the graphic novel itself, did you research images or portraits of the characters, and did this affect your drawing of the graphic novel, and how did you approach drawing those who you did not have any images of?
Oh well, now you have to be quite careful. I felt you had to be very careful with like images from the 18th and 19th century, because portraits from the time were propaganda. And obviously, I've got written here, people who were on the wrong side of history were often the heroes at the time, and the people who were on the right side of history were not the heroes.
And not the people that were making records.
Not making people records. Obviously most of these slaves couldn't even write. And when I say most, I mean most. Obviously, everyone knows that. Now, obviously, there's some characters like Napoleon, who I went to David's portrait of Napoleon in the Tuileries, and that is this supposed to be slide?
Sorry.
And that.
Let's say that this side of it is from one scene, and you see Nic's depiction of Napoleon, and then on the other side you see what Nic did a lot was actually use the portrait on the wall of like officers of like the French.
Yeah, to create this looming impression of Napoleon, who's not present, but he's always present. And it's actually, the painting was painted after the Haitian Revolution, so we're playing around with time and fact.
But it's so iconic, you can't represent Napoleon in
so
any other way.
I couldn't really make up my own Napoleon, so I had to go with the commonly known Napoleon. And also, like, there's Pauline, his sister, and the wife of General Leclerc, who was the general who was sent to re-invade and re-establish slavery. And there was also Maitland, General Maitland, the British general. Now, those three characters were taken from portraits and quite...
Yeah, and then interpreted in your style.
Interpreted in my style.
That's the source.
There were a few leaders of the revolutionary leaders of Haiti later on. Yeah, Christopher and Pétion, who we looked at portraits of, but it kind of was just put into the back of my mind, and what comes out the end of your pen comes out the end of your pen. And then I suppose the other character is Toussaint. Now, his images of Toussaint were created after his death. I believe there was a portrait once painted of Toussaint, but it was destroyed. So there are no, I think, reliable sources of the image of Toussaint, and I believe that all the images of Toussaint are from one little epigraph, or what you call it, probably the wrong word. So I went back to the written description of Toussaint, and also there were elements that I ignored, like Toussaint always wore a handkerchief around his head. We tried to use that, it didn't really work, so we dropped it.
It sort of made him look silly, which obviously wasn't, I'm sure he didn't look silly, but somehow we couldn't draw
Couldn't quite get it to work. So Toussaint was ours. We created our own Toussaint with a little bit of, stuff from historical records.
I mean, one of the things we also thought a lot about was about sort of, when creating a whole book of characters, one of the key things really is about making them all really distinguishable and different from each other and recognisable as you go through. You need to know who's who. So that influenced a lot really of how we, chose to do people. And often a lot of that is through costuming and things like that as well. And so we did quite a lot of sort of research into costuming and military costumes. There's quite a lot of military costumes in it. And in that we were partly trying to do like things historically accurate, but also using quite a lot of artistic license, because there was times when you've got armies fighting on both sides who were wearing almost identical costumes, particularly if you're not using colour, colour artwork. So we'd perhaps choose elements of a military costume that was from 20 years earlier or 20 years later for one side or whatever, so it was just more clear. So there was that sort of artistic license going on, and that, communicating becomes more important than the technical accuracy. But also, not all the characters in our book are sort of famous historical figures. There's, huge numbers of other ordinary people that are in the book. And we kind of realised quite early on that we needed to be really careful to not make kind of crowds of enslaved people look like some sort of mob, or end up kind of falling into reinforcing stereotypes or anything like that. So we talked a lot about making sure we didn't go down that route, and we ended up kind of trying to make almost every character in the crowd scene look unique, and focusing quite a lot on sort of a sense of real people with lives. And we did, so this is like, in the actual play script, there's like a character list. So we had to do an illustrated character list. But in it, we've actually added a number of characters which aren't in the original play, that we've kind of created, if you like, but they're non-speaking parts. And you can see them in this character list, and then you can follow them through the play. People won't pick up on that because it's not verbal, but I think subconsciously people might, even if they don't.
Maybe on a second or third or fourth reading.
Well, if people read
it 4 times.
But also, I think it just sort of adds to the richness and the depth of it, and somehow it'll go into the back of your brain, if not the front. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. So, this is Marie Jean. I apologise if I'm pronouncing anything wrong. And above diagonally is Louis. And you can then see them. So here we see very early stages of the revolution. And so this is there's no words on this spread anyway. we kind of added it in to show things that, because the scenes, there tends to be quite a big time gap between each of the scenes, and so we added in this between two scenes to kind of give more of a sense of what had been happening between the two scenes. And so we see Marie Jean being kind of working in the plantation, being whipped, and then people appearing and as who were revolutionaries, and her being kind of liberated, and her face guard thing being taken off and things. And then we can now see her as a fighter in this kind of battle scene, and in front of her is Louis from the character list as well. So there's lots of examples of this where we see these characters, and the page looks fine if you don't recognise them, but they're there,
Yeah, I hope that when people look at the character list and they're like, who's this Marie Jean, or who's this Thelma, and it will hope to intrigue people and draw them further into our web.
Yeah. And so on that note, do you have a favourite character?
Okay, so I think my
favourite scene as well.
well, I think my favourite character is the mosquitoes. We use mosquitoes a lot in this book. They constantly irritate the whites, and the whites sweat all the time and feel uncomfortable.
But also with the mosquitoes, that it brought yellow fever, which plays an important part in the story later on as well.
And also we try to use the environment and the weather quite a lot. Those elements really interested me. I think my favourite scene is kind of like to me it's the emotional heart of the book. It's where Napoleon's fleet turns up to reimpose slavery. This is the largest fleet in history at the time that had been sent over to reimpose slavery in Haiti. And the revolutionaries burned down the capital city, Le Cap, for the second time. They'd burnt it down previously, then they'd rebuilt it, and now they burnt it down again. It's quite an extreme thing to do.
And they've done it to make it more difficult for the fleet to land and kind of get into the country. They're trying to keep
them out, and also starve them of any resources that they might have. So, throw the horses down the wells, poison the water, everything they can do to further their cause. Anyway, so I'd read obviously a lot of history books, but I'd never read anything about a refugee convoy leaving the Cap as it burned. But that did happen. That did happen because it's obvious. It must have happened. So we thought, well, okay, that obviously it kind of hopefully makes the reader understand these people's struggle more and their sacrifice, but also understand, it brings in the various refugee crises of today. And we want to make this story as relevant today as it can be. So I suppose another scene for me that was very
just to say that in the original play script, that scene, it doesn't reference the refugee convoy. It says it takes place in a hut.
It takes in a hut.
Toussaint's hut in the mountains. So we took the decision to place it somewhere else, and obviously the dialogue is all the same. So in terms of telling the story, it's the same. It's just in a different.
And it's a very dramatic scene because it's where Toussaint's sons turn up, having been in France for many years being educated. They turn up, the capital city's burning, and then they have to make this terrible decision about what side his two sons, what side they're actually going to fight on. They're going to fight the revolutionaries.
Napoleon has told them that they're turning up as friends, but Toussaint and the revolutionaries, they can see through that. They know that
you turned up with the largest fleet in history.
You're there to reimpose slavery, so there's this awful kind of dilemma that goes.
And one of the sons goes with Toussaint, and one of the sons goes with the French. And it's a real thing. It happened. I suppose another scene that particularly kind of made me feel like perhaps we've done something special. I don't know. Was the prison scene at the end of the book. Obviously, Toussaint is kidnapped by the French, or abducted, or arrested, whatever. And we, in this scene, we could have played it more straight and just had it as tragic images of Toussaint in a prison cell. Maybe you want to scroll through them, but
we're going to do that later.
Yeah.
We chose to sort of abstract it into a kind of stylized, sense of it really. of him being kind of completely lost and isolated and
we wanted to sort of
voice.
we wanted to make his experience more of a universal experience. I didn't want it just to be about Toussaint. You know, it's about the Haitian people. They've had their leader.
It somehow intensifies the tragedy by this kind of abstraction, I think. I mean, that's our aim.
Just showing what it looks like within the
Yeah, and the so
it's about Toussaint. It's not that it's not about Toussaint. It's just we're trying to universalise it. As I'll scroll through in a minute. But
yeah. So the idea of him. So in this scene, he's falling through water whilst chained. I had this idea when I was in a swimming pool, and you know, I'd read various accounts of Toussaint's abduction and him in a cabin on a boat going across the sea. You can imagine like the creaking. He's not allowed to see outside the windows. You know, and to me, it felt like he was perhaps drowning whilst chained. And you know, Toussaint was a Creole, so he was born in Haiti, unlike most of the enslaved population at the time. So he would have never experienced the Middle Passage. He would have never been in Africa. He would have never gone through that trauma. But of course,
being transported, but somehow there's a parallel in him transported to France.
Backwards, yeah.
Everyone else having been, you know.
And of course, he would have known of the Middle Passage, and the Middle Passage would have been an imagined thing for him, but a very deep scar for him as well.
But these aren't all the pages in the scene, but just to scroll through some of this very sort of abstracted kind of sinking through these like collective memories, almost. You know, his imagination mixed with a kind of collective memory, really. I think my favourite scenes are it would be the opening scene of the book, I think, which I just think is really powerful, kind of emotional, but kind of politically clear kind of glimpse of what life was like before the start of the revolution. And you've got this kind of horrendous brutality that goes on in that scene, but you've also got this kind of surface, like sort of civilization of these two men, you know, sipping wine, discussing politics, and you know, listening to Mozart, and it's that juxtaposition which, you know, I think is really great. I'll show you a couple of images from that. So that's one spread where there's a lot of commotion and arguing and people being dragged off, and there's a lot of brutality, and then the sort of final spread in the scene where they're, you know, overlooking the mountains and chatting about the French Revolution and things. That it's
tasting liberty, equality, and fraternity.
After they just hung someone, you know. It's I also really like. There's a scene about a third of the way through the play, which I always refer to as Jack Mel Taken, which is like one of the lines from it. And to me, it's like the real political heart of the story, and a real turning point in the revolution, with the power away from the colonialists and towards the revolutionaries. Changes the thing, but you've got you have the like leaders of France, like representatives from France, military representative from Britain, and a diplomat from America, all kind of plotting together to defeat Toussaint, even though Toussaint at this point is part of the French army. He's like a French general, but they're actually plotting for his downfall because he's become too powerful. They don't feel like they can control the revolution anymore, and they're there discussing with Britain, who they're actually at war with, but they're conspiring together, and they talk very openly about, you know, we need to work in our common colonial interest to maintain our interest in these islands and preserve our white domination and stuff like that. And it's just really exposes a lot of the politics, I guess, that are going on at the time. And it's a real turning point, because you then have Toussaint and Christopher and Dessalines all turn up, having taken Jacmel, this town that they think is completely impregnable and they're never going to win. And the tables all turn completely on their head, and they're in the office of the like French governor or whatever, and he ends up being kicked out, and they end up sort of taking control of the office, and with it control of the island.
Yeah, I mean, that photo itself just illustrates like how vivid some of these scenes really Ah, so there aren't that many women or children, or in the novel, or if they are, they're kind of supporting roles, as maybe wives or these characters like Mary Jean. How do you think we can include more women in these histories of war and revolution? And how can we be more creative to fill the silences and lack of evidence?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's something we talked about a lot, really, when working on this. You know, the text, the original play text, it does focus very much on sort of great men and big world politics, and I think that's, you know, a reflection in a lot of ways, you know, of its time. It was written in the 1930s. And as you said, there's 3 speaking parts for women. And they are kind of, yeah, as you say, more supporting characters than the main ones. And
yeah, so women played a key role. Sorry, I was entranced. Women played a key role in the Haitian Revolution. You know, at times the Revolutionary Army was a third female, and I think there's quite a lot of accounts of the most radical voices within the base of the Revolutionary Army. A lot of the most radical voices were women, and like, you know, we've tried as much as possible to represent them through the imagery. You know, not only the women but also the children that fought. You know, this army had teenagers and children fighting in it. But to accept, you know, we can't change the text. And if C.L.R. James was alive, we might have talked to him about that.
As we talked about these non-speaking characters that we created, we tried to make that as many of those as women as possible, and therefore then place them in, you know, and not just those characters, you know, just with the our representation. It's not a book of men, you know, visually. It is a book of all of life in its visual representation when you have the crowd scenes and things, but obviously not so much if you've got 4 people in an office discussing something, you
and
know.
they're all men.
And I think, so just, you know, to give another example of that, this is just inside the book. We have like these kind of lineup of enslaved people from the start, and you know, that's got women, it's got a child, and then we see them from the back as well, and one of the women's holding a gun as a sort of little like sign of like the resistance that was always there, and a kind of nod to what's to come. So we tried to kind of show all of that, and as I said, you know, with those unknown slaves, but I think, you know, we'd be very interested to know other people's ideas about that as well, because we kind of did what we felt we could, but it is something we talked about a lot, really.
So we're going to open the floor up to questions. So while everyone's maybe gathering their thoughts and thinking of any questions they'd like to ask Sakina and Nic, I'll ask one more question. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how this novel matters today and what it can tell us about broader themes around histories of slavery, race, empire, resistance, and as well as how it kind of resonates with the Black Lives Matter movement of recent years and anti-racism more generally.
Yeah, I think the story tells us so much about all of that, and for us, that's why we wanted to do it. You know, it's relevance today, and you know, these amazing events from the past are a huge inspiration, and we hope they kind of can be an inspiration for kind of struggles in the future.
Yeah, like, you know, Eric Williams, who wrote the amazing book Capitalism and Slavery, I think in 1944, and he was also the first president of independent Trinidad and Tobago. He wrote, British historians, not black historians, British historians write almost as if Britain had introduced Negro slavery solely for the satisfaction of abolishing it. And, you know, I think that's still the dominant narrative. It certainly was when I was growing up, that the ruling classes had abolished slavery out of the goodness of their hearts. They woke up one morning and thought, this is a terrible idea. Of course, it was done completely begrudgingly, and they did it because the system of slavery was no longer working. And it was also, it was no longer acceptable in a viable system. Because it was resisted, and this book tells the truth about this struggle against slavery and the brutal circumstances of the enslaved, and
but that constant resistance.
That constant resistance, yeah.
And in terms of racism, like modern racism is rooted in slavery. Enlightenment ideas and things which grew in popularity in the 18th century talked about all men being equal, but that was in complete contradiction to the realities of slavery. And the only way to reconcile that was to develop kind of sort of pseudo-scientific theories that Africans were not fully human. And in previous societies, people were often hostile and suspicious of other people, of outsiders, of people that were different. But the notion of race as something that was inherited, that you couldn't change it, that was about skin colour, was something that was modern and old, and something that you couldn't alter. You couldn't change your religion or adapt your culture. That it was something you inherited and you couldn't change. That was new, and it was a myth, created to justify slavery. And the Haitian Revolution was such a huge challenge to that ideology, and it showed, that black Africans could organise, they could fight back, they could overthrow the most powerful colonial countries of the world at the time, and they could run their society. And it's that's really inspirational, and it's such a sort of challenge to what we're fed about the history of sort of slavery and empire and things, and that's really important, inspirational now.
Yeah, I think another way in which the book talks about what's happening now is the behaviour of the colonial powers and the people who are in power. What they will do to maintain their power, and the way they'll use divide and rule to control people, and their absolute lack of scruples.
And you can see, countless kind of modern examples of our contemporary people following the same kind of things today. And in the time we've been working on this project, like the Black Math, we've been working on this for about 10 years from, when we first started, obviously with other work going on in between and things, but it spans that kind of time frame. And, Black Lives Matter movement during that time has really completely transformed the public kind of debates and dialogue really around this. 10 years ago, these things would have all been really inspirational, but the discussions around them were very much on the fringes in a way that now feels very much more, it's become centre stage. When we started this project, we wouldn't have imagined that by the time it was published that there was like an international debate around the legacy of slavery, about who from slavery should, who from history should be remembered, whose statues should be pulled down, and about, potentially finally sort of payments around reparations. I think the story tells us if we want change and we want to challenge like the continued problems we have today of racism and imperialism, that we can't rely on whether it's William Wilberforce or contemporary politicians, but we have to kind of organise and create movements. And I think that ties in so well again with Black Lives Matter, because that, why has that debate been transformed in the 10 years? It's because of a mass movement.
Excellent. Thank you. Right.